Blade Runner, let's start with a benchmark. A film that not only defined an entire genre, but also created its own visual language. Blade Runner. When Ridley Scott released his dark, philosophical dystopia, the film was a complete disaster. Audiences expecting a simple sci-fi shooter in the style of Star Wars misunderstood the complex, melancholic plot and noirish, depressing atmosphere. The film bombed miserably at the box office, failing to recoup even half its budget. However, over the years, thanks to a visual aesthetic that has become the absolute benchmark for cyberpunk and profound questions about the nature of humanity, artificial intelligence, and memory, Blade Runner began its majestic ascent. Every detail, from the perpetual rain and neon lights of a future Los Angeles, to the decades-long debate over whether the protagonist, Deckard, is a replicant, cemented its status. Today, it is considered one of the greatest, most influential, and most philosophical science fiction films of all time. A cult following begins where audiences initially misunderstood but then couldn't forget, returning to unravel its mysteries. The Thing, that same fateful year of 1982. Another masterpiece that suffered a brutal commercial failure. John Carpenter's The Thing was initially panned by critics and bombed at the box office, in part because it was released almost simultaneously with Steven Spielberg's more optimistic, family-friendly, and kinder E.T. American audiences didn't need the dark, claustrophobic atmosphere with its mistrust and paranoia. Critics found the film too creepy, repulsive, and unnecessarily violent, especially its innovative but gruesome effects with the deformed monster. But over time, audiences recognized Carpenter's genius. The Thing isn't just a horror film, it's a tense psychological thriller about paranoia, where the monster isn't so much an alien as the mistrust within a group that corrodes people from within. Today, it's unanimously recognized as one of the best, most atmospheric horror films of all time, proving that true suspense-driven classics don't need instant recognition, but rather a patient audience. Fight Club. In the late 1990s, a film that initially sparked outrage rather than applause earned cult status. Fight Club, directed by David Fincher and starring Edward Norton and Brad Pitt, was initially underrated, and its box office performance was disastrous. The studio didn't know how to market it, and critics deemed it controversial, subversive, and even dangerous due to its anarchic and radical anti-consumer themes. However, with its release on DVD and VHS, the film began a turbulent second life, becoming a Bible for a generation disillusioned with corporate culture, capitalism, and mindless consumerism. Tyler Durden's aphorisms about work, possessions, and freedom resonated with the people and became a symbol of rebellion against the system. It's not just a movie, it's a poignant, timely manifesto. Over time, it became a cult classic for a generation that remains relevant and endlessly quoted today. The Big Lebowski. If there's a film born with a cult following, it's the Coen brothers' The Big Lebowski. In 1998, the film was virtually ignored in theaters, grossing a meager amount. Mass audiences didn't understand this strange, leisurely, surreal, and occasionally absurd detective story. However, the few who saw it immediately felt its unique, relaxed energy. The cult of the dude, Jeffrey Lebowski, who simply wants his stained carpet back, grew exponentially. Festivals, fan conventions dedicated to the dude, and endless quotes have made him immortal. Today, he's not just a film, he's a philosophy, a kind of religion for those seeking peace and spontaneity in the chaos of the modern world. The White Russian scene, and his unflappable attitude towards life, have ensured him an eternal place in the hearts of fans. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Not all cult classics are old. Edgar Wright's 2010 film, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, is a modern example of how creativity and innovation don't guarantee instant box office success. Based on a comic book, the film was visually revolutionary, embracing the dynamic aesthetics of video games, manga, and indie culture. However, it was a box office failure, failing to recoup even half its budget worldwide. But its fortunes were dramatically changed by young audiences and geek culture fans. For them, it wasn't just a movie, but a vibrant, dynamic, and witty declaration of love for video games, comics, indie music, and the complexities of teenage relationships. Over time, it garnered a huge cult following among gamers and comic book fans, becoming a beloved film they rewatch ad infinitum, savoring every visual reference and sound effect. Donnie Darko. Our first section concludes with a film that was itself a mystery, Donnie Darko. Released in 2001, at an extremely unfortunate time, just after 9/11, its dark, apocalyptic theme about the end of the world failed to resonate with mainstream audiences. The film was complex, strange, and full of philosophical subtext about time travel, fate, and predestination. It was an immediate failure, barely grossing $500,000. However, thanks to word of mouth, a DVD release, and legendary midnight screenings, it became a cult favorite among fans of philosophical and surreal thrillers. Jake Gyllenhaal, as an anxious teenager, and a mysterious 6-foot-tall rabbit named Frank, became symbols of an entire subgenre. It's a puzzle film that requires multiple viewings to fully understand, and it's this complexity and layering that has ensured its immortality and enduring popularity. The Iron Giant, Puerto Rican category, has its own tragic story that has become a classic. 1999's The Iron Giant, now considered a masterpiece, was an absolute flop for Warner Brothers. This was largely due to the studio's poor marketing and promotional skills. Audiences simply overlooked it compared to other animated films. But director Brad Bird created an incredibly touching, wise, and anti-war story about the friendship between a boy and a giant robot, raising important themes of militarism, fear of the unknown, and, most importantly, humanity. Thanks to the power of the internet and a DVD re-release, the film has enjoyed a resurgence and widespread acclaim. Its cult status stems from its message, "You are what you choose," proving timeless and deeply relatable. Today, it is a must-see example of classic hand-drawn animation. Office Space. Mike Judge's 1999 Office Space is arguably the greatest office satire of all time, yet it was completely overlooked and ignored in theaters. Shot on a shoestring budget, the comedy flew under the radar, but it garnered a powerful cult following among office workers and anyone who has ever felt part of a soulless corporate machine. Its sarcastic mockery of corporate culture, idiotic bosses, pointless meetings, and routine work became an anthem. The printer-destroying scene became legendary, and the character whose fax machine constantly malfunctioned became a symbol. The film perfectly struck a nerve with the working class, tired of routine, and this ensured its status as a timeless, quotable classic. Dredd, Judge Dredd 2012. A reboot of the iconic British comic book, received rave reviews from fans and critics, but was a commercial disaster. It flopped at the worldwide box office. However, fans appreciated its dark, brutal, uncompromising style, violence, and the incredible precision with which Karl Urban portrayed the character, never removing his helmet. Shot in a neo-noir style, with incredibly stylized scenes, the film became a benchmark for how to adapt comic books. Its theatrical failure didn't stop it from becoming a beloved action film among genre fans who still clamor for a sequel, acclaiming it as one of the best sci-fi action films of its decade. Tremors. Let's move on to a monster movie classic that found its way onto VHS. 1990's Tremors, where Kevin Bacon battles giant subterranean worms, failed to impress audiences initially, and failed to make a dent at the box office. It was a low-budget but incredibly inventive film that skillfully blended horror and comedy. The plot was simple, but the tension, humor, and excellent chemistry between the leads proved infectious. Reruns on TV and a VHS release allowed it to find its niche and become a beloved monster movie, spawning an entire franchise of several sequels. This story proved that cult status doesn't always depend on massive special effects, but on the charisma of the characters, the originality of the monster, and the ability to balance fear and laughter. Children of Men. Alfonso Cuarón's 2006 film, Children of Men, is a visually stunning and deeply pessimistic sci-fi drama. Initially, the film performed poorly at the box office. However, critics were surprised and gradually began to recognize its greatness. Shot with incredible, unseen long takes, the film became a visual and narrative benchmark, influencing many subsequent works. It tells the story of a world where women have stopped giving birth, and it is essentially a chronicle of the end of a world devoid of a future. Its grim realism, socio-political commentary, and cinematography that immerses one in chaos have earned it an enduring cult following among fans of serious, thoughtful science fiction. The Shawshank Redemption. It's impossible to talk about cult classics without mentioning The Shawshank Redemption from 19... Today, it's the one film in most audience rankings, such as IMDb, but it was a resounding failure at the box office. Its box office gross was extremely low, and it was completely overshadowed by other blockbusters of that year. The reasons: its odd title, its grim prison theme, and the lack of a major star at the outset. But with its release on VHS, and most importantly, thanks to endless cable programming, the film became a national favorite. Its story of hope, patience, friendship, and inner freedom in inhumane conditions has proven timeless and universal. It's the prime shining example of how a film can become a cult classic not through marketing, but through the sheer genuine quality and power of its human story. Edge of Tomorrow. Tom Cruise's 2014 film Edge of Tomorrow is a modern example of how poor marketing can ruin a brilliant, intelligent film. It had a disastrous opening, partly due to a confusing advertising campaign and a tagline change. Audiences were confused about the film, based on a Japanese novel. However, sci-fi fans quickly embraced its ingenious concept: a soldier trapped in a time loop and forced to relive the same battle endlessly. It became a fan favorite for its clever plot, inventive action, and the superb chemistry between Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. It's a rare case of fans loving a film so much that it forced Hollywood to seriously consider a sequel, despite its initial failure. Stardust. In the fantasy world, our hero is 2007's Stardust, an adaptation of Neil Gaiman's novel. It was underrated at the box office, earning modest box office receipts. But those who saw it fell in love with its fairy tale atmosphere, charm, humor, and incredibly charismatic characters. The film became a cult fantasy thanks to its old-fashioned charm, romance, brilliant cast, and unafraid sentimentality. It's a pure, heartwarming tale that doesn't try to be dark or cynical, and it's precisely this sincerity that has made it treasured by its devoted fans. The cult following of Stardust lives on, passed down by word of mouth like a true legend. The Nice Guys. Closing out our tier list is Shane Black's 2016 film, The Nice Guys. This 70s set detective thriller starring Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe was met with critical acclaim, but flopped in theaters, grossing very little. Audiences largely ignored it. However, the film gained a huge cult following thanks to online viewing and streaming services. Fans appreciated Shane Black's signature sharp humor, the incredible explosive chemistry between the leads, and the director's mastery of crafting a perfectly crafted, stylish noir detective story. It's proof that cult followings can emerge even in the streaming era, where quality transcends box office receipts. Conclusion. We've looked at 15 films that prove that a failure at the start doesn't necessarily mean the end. Sometimes, it's the misunderstood and dismissed films that become the ones we rewatch again and again, the ones we cite and debate. These films, which failed to sell in theaters, have become cultural treasures thanks to the power of devoted fans and an undying love for cinema. Their stories remind us, box office sales are just numbers, but true audience love, their devotion, and repeated viewings are what truly defines immortality. A cult following begins when audiences initially said no, but later realized what they missed out on. Which film from our list would you rewatch right now? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to see more stories about cinema that changes the rules. See you soon.